Ram raids, shootings, stabbings, robberies. Crime has dominated news bulletins.
It must be the most brazen ram raid in recent...
Police have not been able to confirm whether firearms were stolen in a ram raid on guns.
Another night, another raid. Brazen, efficient and devastating.
Retailers say criminals are getting more brazen in their attacks on shops and employees are in danger.
The crime wave that's hitting dairies and other retailers almost daily across the country has turned deadly. The family's grieving.
Another night, another ram raid happening with such regularity that, incredibly, it's almost an everyday occurrence.
Not so incredibly, victims, retailers, shop owners and communities are fearful and fed up.
Now, we've all had enough of ram raids, senseless attacks that have left a path of destruction up and down the country.
Angry business owners hit by a wave of ram raids and burglaries laid out a list of demands to the police minister today.
Business leaders are accusing the government of having blood on their hands.
These business owners were on a mission.
What I would say is that the time for talks is over.
So the government has responded and taken action. Well, technically it's public action they want.
Members of the public and retailers could soon have beefed up rights to make citizens' arrests as the government looks to clamp down on retail crime.
Citizens' arrests can be made and people can be detained for any breaking of the Crimes Act at any time of the day. We want to clarify that the reasonable force available to the arrests may include the use of restraints.
The government's being accused of encouraging vigilante justice.
It's going to put those retail workers in harm's way. They could end up injured, or even in the worst cases, they could end up being killed.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and on The Detail today, the citizen's arrest. We look at what a citizen will be able to do under the amended law, why the government's expanded the powers, the pros, the cons, the risks, and whether crime will actually come down.
It's empowering people to do things without any safety net. It's like walking a tightrope without a safety net. I don't think you and I would try that, even if we were drunk.
That's Professor Mark Hennihan from the Auckland Law School. He's concerned about these changes to the law for the people who might be incorrectly targeted, for the retail workers put in the line of danger, and for the safety of society as a whole.
People might say, well, if they think they're going to stop us, we're going to be ready for it, We're going to have something to knock them on the head or push them out, harm them in some way so we can get away. At the end of the day, they don't want to be caught. So whether they just suddenly produce a spanner or something else and do that is the fear. And I just don't think we want a society where people feel they have to do that. We'll get like America, where people want to have guns on them to protect themselves, and that leads to all sorts of deaths and crazy killings in those situations.
But let's rewind. I started by asking Mark to explain what exactly is a citizen's arrest.
Well, it's been around for a long time and been in the Crimes Act since 1961 and even before that. It's sort of aimed at specific situations, mainly at night when there's not so many people around. And so a citizen can use, like anyone else, some reasonable force to detain someone. They can't detain them for too long, but detain someone to stop them from doing something. So it's in most law that citizens can do arrest. Not that many citizens do it, but it's there.
But the current legislation doesn't protect retailers or security guards from liability if they try to detain an offender during the day and if the stolen goods are worth less than $1,000. So the proposed changes mean any person can intervene and detain an offender at any time of the day and over goods of any value. But people making the citizen's arrest will have to contact police and follow their instructions. Also, the level of restraint being employed will be clarified as the government tweaks the bill over the coming weeks. Here's Justice Minister Paul Goldsmith at the announcement.
All these things are about dealing with the circumstances that I think many New Zealanders would have seen and experienced over the last few years, with people walking out of shops, stealing stuff and not paying, and the owners and the general public not really having the ability to do anything about it. And we don't think that is sustainable. Now, of course, the obvious concern that many people have is that we don't want to encourage an uptick in violence and vigilantism and the Wild West. And, of course, none of this is compulsory for any company or any business. It's really a set of tools that they can use if they want to. And everybody, of course, in every instance, in every circumstances, needs to consider their own safety first. That goes without saying.
When he was asked if he was worried that retailers would be injured or killed, this was his reply.
Well, look, I'm very concerned about the high level of retail crime at the moment, and we want to do everything we can to reduce that, and sending a clear message that there are consequences for doing that. I think part of the reason why we've seen an increase over the past few years is that certain people have come to the conclusion that they can get away with it and nobody will ever stop them. And so we want to change that message.
We're going to solve retail crime. We're going to get the people in the retail shops to just spring out from behind the counter and grab someone and detain them until the police come. And I heard this morning sometimes the police can be 2 hours. Well, holding someone for 2 hours that may be false imprisonment if you hold them for too long. You're meant to process people reasonably quickly. So it's got so many fishhooks in it that I think it's been thought through for the wrong reasons.
Because it seems when I've been listening to the government coming out a little bit light on detail. Is that fair?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it was a promotion. Normally a bill would have to go through Parliament, be debated and refined. I think there's been a lot of information about retail crime, and so the first thing they do is, there was some sort of think tank that got together and said, this is the answer. Let's get all these burly people working in retail. We'll get all these great hulks working in retail, and people will be terrified to take anything. I think its intention was wrongly aimed, I think. I mean, it's not their job. And you couldn't make it a condition of a contract saying you must train weeks of training in how to arrest a person. The police have to take quite severe training in that. Even security guards don't really train it properly because they don't really have the authority to do it either. So I think it's a reaction. It's got a bad reaction because it wasn't thought through. Clearing up the law is always a good thing. Not that people go out in the morning and say, I wonder how I can do a citizen's arrest today, what I need to do. It's not something people think about. But it's there, I suppose, if someone does rush out and grab someone and act reasonably, then they're not going to be charged with assault or a civil charge for behaving in ways and stopping other citizens. Because there are situations where you can physically restrain people. I mean, the provision just after the arrest one is about if someone's going to commit suicide, you can intervene and physically stop them doing it. So there are situations where the law does allow you to intervene. Normally you can't intervene and touch people, as a minister found recently. So it's normally a thing you're not meant to do, but in certain situations you can do it, and citizen's arrest is one of them.
Critics have been hot on what reasonable force is. The government says this will be made clear. So far, though, those details are thin.
Well, not necessarily a headlock or anything like that. It's just holding them steady. And then the role is to call for the police.
They've also made a change to the law of self-defence. With defence of yourself, you can use reasonable force depending on the force applied to you. Defence of property, you're not meant to rush out and beat someone up because they're not actually harming you. But they've kind of widened that, so you can use reasonable force to defend your property. Defence would only really come up, I suppose, if the person leaving started to attack them and then they started to use reasonable force.
Just stop you there, Mark, what is reasonable force? Define that.
Yeah, well, reasonable force, like most legal concepts, that's why we need lawyers, thank God. It keeps me employed. It depends on the circumstances. So it depends very much on the degree of force being applied to you. So if someone is sort of standing there quite mildly and agreeing with your detention, you can't physically kind of grab them and push them around or physically shake them and do things like that. But if someone's attacking you quite physically, you can use the same degree of force to protect yourself. So it depends on the force that's being applied to you. So if someone's leaving the shop with some goods and then you say stop and they stop, you don't then just physically grab them, throw them to the ground and halt and sit on them because they're actually doing that. And the police would do the same thing. If they say you're under arrest and you say, all right, game's up, I'm going to go along with it, then at that point you've detained them. So you can't use physical force unless you really have to in the circumstances.
So what safeguards are in place to sort of prevent misuse or abuse of these powers?
That's the big issue because, I mean, the police, whenever they use force in an arrest, have to write a report. They're required to. And if you look up the Police Complaints Authority, it's one of the most common complaints. Like during a protest, people will be arrested and some people say that person was, grabbed and pulled across and dumped on the ground and things happened to them that didn't seem appropriate because they were going quite consensually with the police officer. So that's a requirement for the police. It doesn't seem to have been suggested in this because you have to act, any excess force is an assault. You've got to use force which is appropriate. So if you go overboard, and that's the other worry about this, some vigilantes will say, I'm ready to go. Someone told me yesterday that Bishop Brian Tamaki had made a statement that his fellows would be able to get out there and make things better for the community.
On X, formerly Twitter, Brian Tamaki wrote, "How excited I am that Man Up is about to receive increased powers to police where law and order has failed. The law is better late than never.
And you don't want people going out thinking they're empowered to arrest anyone they see coming along that's not doing what they think's appropriate. The police have to learn this, and you've got to do it really well. It takes a lot of learning, and I don't think you would have the time or the inclination to train all your retail. And even then, they didn't want to be police officers. They wanted to be retail staff. They don't want to have a pair of handcuffs in their back pocket and be ready to jump on you if you do anything unusual.
And that brings me to, could these changes lead to an increase in vigilante behaviour or even racial profiling?
I'm sure they can, I'm sure they can, and that's another concern that people have. If you target the wrong people, that could also lead to charges in that sense. The law normally would allow, and it hasn't got the details yet, if it's reasonable in the circumstances that they were committing an offence. But it's got to be reasonable. You can't say, well, look, they're of a certain colour and these people commit offences, therefore I arrested them. That would be utterly wrong. So those risks are run because some people are more targeted than others, as we know. That's throughout our legal system. Even the police have to be constantly reminded of that, because if you look at the statistics, if you're Maori and Pacific, you're more likely to be stopped, you're more likely to be questioned, you're more likely to be charged, and you're more likely to have to go to court. So you have to hear in court and more likely to be found guilty. So those things are really important, and that pervades the whole of society in many ways. People do have different views of the way people behave, and some people have unusual behaviour and they're perfectly harmless. The best people, I suppose, look innocent, and that's why they get away with it. The ones that aren't, and some people will get caught in that. If we say this is going to become sort of a sport where you can arrest people willy-nilly, I think that would be awful for our society.
What are the risks for retailers and employees when engaging with offenders? How does the law protect them?
Well, it only protects them if they use reasonable force and act within whatever the law requires of them. After that, they're open to charges, and if they act really badly, even though we have ACC for injuries, if they act really badly and injure someone, they can be charged with a civil battery, and while their compensation would be covered by ACC, they can be made an example. So the courts can say, you behaved so badly with that particular person that we're going to make an example. So it's almost like a fine. So you can sue them and you get the compensation. It happened during the Springbok tour where some police just lost the plot with some clowns doing some entertaining the protesters, and police just got them and beat the hell out of them. And the three of them got, and that's way back in 1981, it's quite a lot of money, $10,000 each as exemplary damages. Their injuries, their hospital, and that's covered by ACC, but the police were made an example and said, you've got it awfully wrong, you've got the wrong person. In fact, in another case, a woman was walking the streets in Wellington, and she looked like a drunken punk. She had her hair shaved and she was all wobbly. So they just assumed, this targeting thing, that she was going to do some harm, so they grabbed her and that she was drunk and threw her in the paddy wagon, drove around all night. And subsequently it was found that she was actually a person on chemo and very sick, and that's why she was wandering and looking and so she's also got exemplary damages for. So that's what can happen if you get it awfully wrong. And what you just said before, Amanda, that targeting the wrong people can happen when people think they have she's a troublemaker, she's probably on drugs. Look at her, she's got her hair shaven. Let's just pick her up and throw her in without anything happening. So they're examples of where people have got it wrong, and the police in those cases. And that's the sort of thing can happen, even with police who are highly trained.
Will then, Mark, the law increase liability for businesses if an employee gets injured while attempting a citizen's arrest?
In one sense, if they're injured, they are covered to a degree by ACC. So in America, they'd be suing the employer for putting them at risk in those situations. They still could bring employment action saying that the employer didn't do enough to train them and look after them and make sure that if they did try this, they had some backup to make sure they wouldn't get injured. So they could still bring action in terms of the way they were treated if the employer hasn't put enough protections in place, and get some damages through that. The physical damages are normally covered by ACC, so if they had to go to hospital and get those things done. But again, if the employer acted so outrageously negligent, which is the standard for negligence for exemplary damages, and just didn't care about the employees and sort of threw them to the lion's den, then again they could get exemplary damages for outrageous negligence, for behaving in ways that were just so outrageous they didn't care about the. I hope we don't have employees like that in New Zealand, but you never know. It's becoming a little bit like the Wild West.
But he does hope employers look after their employees and give them training to approach offenders safely. So does he think training should be mandatory?
I would have thought so, and even then they shouldn't feel there's an obligation to do it. I think they should be trained to obviously deal with customers in a way they don't have to physically interact with them, because I think it's risky. As we've said, knives and various things can be pulled out. So they should be trained in a way to be observant of people doing these things, and if they're going to approach someone, how they would approach them in a way that's not going to put them at risk. I don't think they should be trained in how to put arm bars and things like that on people, or physically hold people in those circumstances, because I think that's just dangerous, and they're never going to... You'd have to do it every week to get it right. You'd have to go to a gym and train to do all that sort of stuff, and I don't think it's part of their mandate to do that. So I think training them how to behave in ways that they keep safe would be the thing I would say, not how to make an arrest, because I think making an arrest is not a safe activity. Police will tell you that. Police get injured making arrests of people. So how do you remain safe in a context where, and that there's no expectation on you to physically intervene in these circumstances? Because I think that would be, I think people would be straight in the employment court saying, these people aren't employed to make arrests. These people are employed to sell clothes and sell things to people. So I don't think they could cross that line. Security guards, I've already heard that they're going to try and beef themselves up and do, but they're only going to do a week's training, and I don't think that's enough, because they are big burly people, and they would want more powers, and they want to use handcuffs and various things to stop people. And so if shops want to go that way, they'd probably go down that track. But even then, the police would have to make sure that it was safe. Because if you're not trained the way the police are, and even the police get it wrong, so and a week's training's not much. I just think that's a risk for them as well. If they go too far, they risk harming people and getting into difficulties.
Surely this is more targeted at security guards. This is who they're trying to give them more powers.
Well, they were standing outside a dairy when they made the announcement, and not many dairies can afford having security guards standing out there all day. It costs you money. Big shops can do that, and obviously those shops that you and I would never go to, like those very highly end shops, Amanda, they have
not on a journalist's wage.
Well, you deserve to go there, but it's a tough one. So they have security, but not others don't have security because it's costly. It's a big added cost to them when they think that perhaps the police should be doing that job. Not why should they be paying? It's kind of privatising the police. You have to hire your own police. It's sort of in the privatisation thing, which I think coalition government seems to like, and that they're struggling with the margins anyway and saying that you're going to pay, because it's not going to cost you nothing. It's going to be expensive if you open 7 days a week, having someone standing there all day to do that. Big supermarkets may well do it, but your small dairies and other shops are not going to be able to afford it.
What's your advice then to innocent bystanders, say someone who goes into a dairy or someone who sees a crime happening? What's your advice where they're thinking, right, I'm going to go in and make a citizen's arrest?
My advice would be not to make a citizen's arrest first. My advice would be to be very watchful, take a good look at the description of the person. If you can, when they're not looking, if there's not cameras in there, get a photo so you can report it to the police and say, look, I took a photo of this person and they were stealing some goods from this particular place. I think that's the safest thing to do. We all like to think we're going to be heroes, but, I had this dream one day that, there's some terrorists here and I take them in the best rugby tackle I've ever done and they fly to the ground and, you're famous all over the world. No, you'd be probably dead if you tried that stuff. And we don't want to encourage that sort of behaviour. If you're not trained in it, you're just not going to get it right. And these people do this stuff a lot, so they're quite good at being slippery and difficult. And I think it's not a fair fight if you try that, because people have intervened. The thing I think that upsets people, I can think of an example where people are sometimes yelling in a loud voice can be effective. I've sometimes seen people that go in a fight and I've yelled out, "Hey, what the hell?" And they disappear. And once when I was in Paris, I saw a guy hit a guy and he went to the ground. And I thought it's going to be... So I rushed and said, "Excuse me, I'm a doctor. I'm not a doctor. I'm going to see if this guy..." And it all stopped. I wouldn't advise that behaviour either. But at least, I wasn't going to go and stop the fight. But sometimes distraction can make a big difference. And if enough people yell and stop that, it does stop, rather than just rushing in. Because you just don't know. When people are enraged, they lose their mind. They're dangerous. It's like a wild animal. We all got capability of doing that. And unless you're trained, they only have to hit you the wrong place. One blow can kill you.
A family's grieving and a community left reeling after an Auckland shopkeeper was fatally stabbed during a robbery last night.
That dairy worker was killed when he chased the offender who was fleeing with his cash register.
At this stage, the dairy worker approached him, and during an altercation, the victim was stabbed several times. The victim then made his way back to the dairy and called emergency services, but later died.
Do you worry, though, in light of this, that criminals will go, actually, no, we're going to arm ourselves with more weapons, we're going to bring more associates to back themselves up in case more people make citizens arrests?
Absolutely. I think people have commented on that, and I think they're right. People might say, well, if they think they're going to stop us, we're going to be ready for it, We're going to have something to knock them on the head or push them out, harm them in some way so we can get away. At the end of the day, they don't want to be caught. So whether they just suddenly produce a spanner or something else and do that is the fear. And I just don't think we want a society where people feel they have to do that.
He would rather more police on the beat than an increase in citizens' arrests.
Because visibility of police deters people. If police are around, no one's going to do anything like that. So I think we just have to look at that as that should be our primary emphasis, that there's been 2 ram raids in this area. Let's put more police visible in that area so that people don't feel they have to take the law into that. Because it's just wrong that people feel they have to do that. A safe society is not, well, I'll train myself and protect myself. A safe society will get like America, where people want to have guns on them to protect themselves, and that leads to all sorts of deaths and crazy killings in those situations.
And do you think there will be a reduction in retail theft as a result of this?
No, as long as the economy is the way it is and people are struggling, and we have a lot of poverty in this country, and there's always going to be people in any society who steal things.
Do you think the government will review these changes sort of after a set period to sort of assess their effectiveness and any unintended consequences?
I hope so. They're getting quite a few of them already, and so I think that's a healthy thing. So I think they probably will. I think they really have to in these circumstances, because I think it's really important. If suddenly there's an outbreak of citizens' arrests that have gone awfully wrong, they would have to look at it very seriously. I think they probably would have got the message, which is good. The media's done a great job in that, to make sure that they basically do put safety things in there, because it's empowering people to do things without any safety net. It's like walking a tightrope without a safety net. I don't think you and I would try that, even if we were drunk.
Well, that's then up for debate. What happens now, Mark? Will you make a submission? What happens with the bill? What are the next processes?
Well, I probably would make a submission, yeah. I'm not too sure when it will be put into action now, because I think they thought this was a quick sell to say, look, we're dealing. And in one sense, I can understand they do want to assure people things are happening, but I don't think it was the right message to give at this moment, because I think it has meant that security guards see their opportunities have gone up, and good on them. Security guards do a hell of an unthankful job. They stand outside nightclubs late at night and get abused by all sorts of people. It's a tough job, so they feel they've got a bit more room to move in this sense. And hopefully they're trained well, because we don't suddenly want security guards becoming over-aggressive, in these circumstances, because the power to arrest is pretty powerful, isn't it? To actually physically hold someone, another citizen, it's a pretty powerful thing to give to someone. It has to be exercised in the right circumstances. So it requires a lot of degree of training. I mean, they can just grab you and stop you, and hold you. Well, that's a major thing, in our society. So we have to make sure that these people really do understand what the consequences are, and how to do it properly in a way that's not going to harm anyone or themselves.
How would you best sum up these changes that the government are trying to put in place?
I think they're more political than legal changes. I've never seen this before, where they sell a law before they even do it outside of dairy. It seems like a kind of strange thing to do, and I think that's not the way to go about it, basically.
So your advice to the government?
I think they definitely need to go back and think about it very deeply. I think they need to make sure that it's not just put in place for retailers, and they shouldn't be putting pressure on retailers to train staff up to do this, possibly security guards, but then they should really be thinking, is it the police's job? And then look at the kind of reasons for why people do this. They're not all just bad people. Some of them have mental health conditions, some of them have desperation, some of them it's learned behaviour. It's what other family members do, so they follow. There's all sorts of things going on, and we don't get down to the nitty-gritty of why are people doing this. Rather, we're just going to try and stop them doing it. I think got to go back a step further, and I think that should be part of the next time they talk about this. So they've thought about that as well, because there's lots of research done on this stuff as to why people commit certain crimes and what are the profiles of them and what's the best way to deal with them, rather than just give someone who's got no real training to do it, saying you can stop them. Because that doesn't stop people doing it. It stops that person doing it, but it doesn't stop people generally doing it. And as you rightly said, Amanda, it may encourage these people to be better prepared, with something heavy in their pocket. They can push their way through and get out, which is bad.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Professor Mark Hennihan. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Jeremy Ansell. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.